When Lena answered the phone that morning, she didn't know it would change everything. The voice on the other end was polite, professional, yet carried a strange weight, as if the caller had rehearsed this offer 100 times and still wasn't comfortable saying it. "Miss Collins," the woman said, "we have a client in need of overnight care. It's a special case." A special case. That phrase alone should have made her hang up. But rent was due in 3 days, and her little brother's school fees were already late. So she agreed to meet the agency representative that afternoon. The job, they said, was for an elderly widower named Harlan. Lives alone, limited mobility, requires night supervision. The pay? Generous enough to make anyone ignore their gut. Still, there was hesitation in the woman's tone when Lena signed the papers. "Most caregivers don't stay long," she admitted quietly, eyes avoiding Lena's. "It's an old place, far outside town. You might find it unsettling." Unsettling was fine. Lena had worked in worse homes, dark rooms filled with loneliness, people who spoke to ghosts of memory. She told herself she was used to it. By evening, she was driving through the countryside, fog rolling low across the fields like slow-moving ghosts. Her headlights cut through it in short, sharp bursts, revealing nothing but endless road and crooked trees. The GPS signal flickered, and she almost missed the turn, a narrow gravel path lined with skeletal oaks. At the end stood Harlan Manor. It was enormous, a relic from another century. The kind of house that looked like it should have been abandoned long ago, windows shuttered, rooflines twisted against the gray sky. Even from her car, Lena could feel it watching her. The porch light flickered once, then steadied, as if the house had woken up. She parked and took a breath. The air was heavy, damp with the smell of earth and rain. Inside, the warmth from this barely touched the chill that clung to the walls. The interior was grand but tired, faded carpets, a staircase that rose into shadow, portraits whose eyes followed you down the hall. "Mr. Harlan," she called softly. "In here," a voice answered, raspy and thin. She found him in a large bedroom lit by firelight. The man was frail, his skin pale and stretched tight, but his eyes were sharp. He smiled faintly when she entered, though it didn't quite reach his face. "You're the new one," he said. "They always send someone new." Lena set down her bag and tried to sound confident. "Yes, sir. I'll be here through the night. Anything you need, just call." Mr. Harlan studied her for a long moment before speaking again. "You shouldn't stay after midnight." She froze. "Excuse me." "After midnight," he repeated, closing his eyes. "Things change here after midnight." She wanted to ask what he meant, but his breathing had already slowed. He seemed to drift between sleep and memory. Lena took it as exhaustion, though his words clung to her mind like cobwebs. "Be honest with yourself. If someone offered you $10,000 to spend one night in a house everyone says is cursed, would you take the job? If you think you'd last till morning, prove it, like this video, and let's find out how long you'd really survive." The hours passed quietly at first. She checked his vitals, tidied the room, made notes for the agency. The old house groaned with every gust of wind. At 11, she brewed herself coffee in the kitchen, listening to the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional tick of the clock. Then, faintly, came a sound. A soft knock, from upstairs. Lena paused, mug halfway to her lips. The agency had told her the second floor was sealed off years ago, unsafe for use. She waited, holding her breath, but the sound didn't come again. Probably the house settling, she thought. Old wood, temperature change, nothing unusual. When she returned to the hallway, she felt it, a prickling sensation, like someone standing just behind her shoulder. She turned. Nothing. Only the staircase leading up into the dark, each step swallowed by shadow. Back in the bedroom, Mr. Harlan was still asleep. His breathing shallow but steady. Yet as Lena pulled the blanket over him, his lips moved slightly. She leaned closer, thinking he was murmuring in his sleep. "Don't listen," he whispered. "If it calls your name, don't answer." Lena straightened quickly, heart pounding. The fire cracked, throwing long shadows against the wall. For the first time, she wished she hadn't taken the job. But leaving now would mean failure, again. And she'd promised herself there would be no more failures. So she sat in the chair beside the old man's bed, listening to the house breathe. And somewhere above, the floorboards creaked, slow and deliberate, as if something unseen had started to move. The second night at Harlan Manor began quietly enough. The sky was heavy with clouds, and the wind moved through the trees like a restless sigh. Inside, the house held its breath. Lena prepared Mr. Harlan's medication, straightened the sheets, and listened to the steady rhythm of the rain against the windows. By the time he drifted into sleep, the old clock in the hall had just struck 10. She told herself she wouldn't let her imagination run wild again. The strange noises from the night before were just the house, wood expanding, wind through the vents, the usual quirks of age. But denial can only carry so far. Curiosity has a way of tugging at even the most cautious heart. Lena took the small flashlight from her bag and stepped into the hallway. The house was darker tonight. The fire had burned low, and shadows stretched long across the floorboards. She moved slowly, her footsteps muffled by the worn carpet. The portraits on the wall seemed to watch her pass, faces from another era, their eyes painted with that strange lifelike depth only old oil can hold. Each portrait showed the same family, Mr. Harlan, his wife, and a little boy with an expression too solemn for his age. The child's gaze was haunting, steady, sad, and knowing. Then she noticed one frame that had fallen slightly crooked. When she straightened it, her breath caught. The glass was cracked, and the boy's face had been scratched out completely, as if by fingernails. A chill ran through her. Someone had tried to erase him. The next morning, while serving Mr. Harlan his breakfast, she mentioned it casually. "The portraits upstairs, they're beautiful. But there's one, a little damaged." He didn't look up. His spoon hovered in midair. "You've been wandering," he said flatly. "I was only checking on the house," she replied. "That picture of the boy, was that your son?" Silence. The only sound was the faint rattle of the spoon against the bowl. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, distant. "The dead should be left alone." Lena said nothing more. But the way he turned his face toward the window, blank, almost frightened, lingered in her mind long after. That evening, the air inside the house felt heavier. The storm had passed, yet the atmosphere carried a different kind of pressure, the kind that settles in before something breaks. She read by the fire, waiting for midnight, while Mr. Harlan slept soundly in his bed. Then came the footsteps. At first, soft. Barely there. A faint thud from above the ceiling. Then another. A pause. And another, slow, measured, deliberate. Someone was pacing directly above the master bedroom. Her pulse quickened. The agency had been clear, the upper floor was sealed off decades ago, unsafe for entry. She stared at the ceiling, trying to reason through the sound. It wasn't pipes or wind. It was too steady. Too human. Then came the humming. A child's voice, faint but distinct, drifting through the air vent near the fireplace. A simple, aimless tune. The kind a boy might hum to himself while playing alone. Lena rose slowly from her chair. Every instinct screamed at her to stay put, but she found herself walking toward the stairs, flashlight trembling in her hand. The first step groaned under her weight. The second moaned softly, as though protesting. By the time she reached the landing, the humming had stopped. The hallway was black and silent. At the far end stood a door, ancient wood, edges splintered, surface gray with dust. A strip of nails sealed it shut from the outside. Whoever had closed it had wanted it to stay that way. She leaned closer, heart thudding in her ears. For a moment, she thought she heard breathing on the other side. But when she pressed her ear to the wood, there was nothing. Only silence. Lena turned and hurried back down. The fire still burned in the sitting room, though she could have sworn it had nearly gone out before she left. Her hands shook as she set the flashlight down. That's when she saw it. A small wooden horse sat on the mantel. She was certain it hadn't been there before. The carving was delicate, old, the surface worn smooth by time. 2 letters were etched into its side, TH. Her stomach tightened. Thomas Harlan. She looked toward the stairs again, expecting movement in the dark, but nothing stirred. Only the house, breathing softly through its old walls, as if pleased she had noticed. Lena sat down slowly, her eyes fixed on the toy. She told herself she wasn't afraid, just tired, overworked, imagining things. But deep down, she knew something had changed. The house was no longer just creaking. It was listening. Lena didn't sleep that night. Every creak in the floor, every sigh of wind against the window, kept her awake. The image of the wooden horse haunted her thoughts. She told herself she wasn't going to run, not yet. Fear had worn itself out, and what remained was something sharper. Curiosity. By midnight, the old man's breathing had deepened into the steady rhythm of sleep. Lena sat beside the lamp, staring at the stack of books on the table near his bed. She'd noticed his study earlier, a narrow room at the end of the hall, its door always closed. Tonight, she decided she had to know what was inside. The handle turned stiffly, groaning as the door opened. Dust floated through the air like pale ash. The room was lined with shelves filled with ledgers, journals, and photographs too old to touch. On the desk lay a small lamp, cold and useless. She turned on her flashlight and began searching, her fingers tracing over drawers until one caught, stuck halfway. She tugged again, harder this time, and it gave way, revealing a false bottom. Inside were newspaper clippings, their edges yellow and brittle. She unfolded one carefully, and the headline jumped out in faded print, "Local Tragedy, Harlan Family Loses Child in Mysterious Fire." Her throat went dry as she read the details. The blaze had started in the upstairs nursery. The boy, Thomas Harlan, was found too late. The cause, unknown. The rest of the articles told the same story from different voices, neighbors describing strange lights, the wife's breakdown, the father's silence. One photograph showed Mr. Harlan years younger, standing before the same house, his expression hollow, his hand gripping a child's toy. Lena stared at the picture until her hands began to tremble. She didn't know why, but she felt pity. The story wasn't just tragic, it was unfinished. The sealed door upstairs suddenly made sense. The scratches on the photo. The whispers. The boy hadn't left. She returned the papers carefully, heart pounding. The house was quiet again, heavy with that strange stillness that came before something moved. She checked the clock on the mantel, 2:47 a.m. The minute hand quivered slightly, as if unsure whether to move forward. Then she heard it. Soft at first, a sound that didn't belong to the house. A cry. Thin, distant, and filled with pain. It wasn't the moan of pipes or the wind. It was unmistakably the cry of a child. Lena stood frozen. The sound came again, clearer this time, rising from beyond the upstairs hall. Her body moved before her thoughts could catch up. She found the basement door, took the hammer from the tool rack, and climbed the stairs, one slow step at a time. The locked door waited at the end of the hall, the nails glinting faintly in the beam of her flashlight. She hesitated only once, then began prying at the boards. The first nail came loose with a metallic snap, then another, until the last one gave way with a groan that echoed down the hall. The door opened on a room preserved by silence. The nursery. Dust lay thick across the floor, but the furniture looked untouched, a small bed, a shelf of toys, a rocking chair that moved slightly as if stirred by breath. The air was cold, not from draft but presence. Her flashlight wavered, the beam trembling against the wallpaper, faded blue with tiny stars. Then she saw the mirror. In its reflection stood a boy. He was thin, translucent, dressed in white that shimmered faintly. His eyes were soft, not angry, just tired. In his hands, he held the small wooden horse. He looked at her as though waiting for her to speak. Lena couldn't move. Her throat ached with unspoken fear, yet she felt something deeper, sorrow. The boy's lips parted, and his voice came barely above a whisper. "Tell him I forgive him." The lights flickered once, then again, the air pressing heavy against her chest. When she blinked, he was gone. Only the rocking chair remained, swaying gently as if carried by an unseen hand. Lena stood there for a long time, gripping the hammer like it could protect her from what she didn't understand. But there was no threat in that room. Only grief, ancient, patient, and finally heard. When she turned off the flashlight, the darkness didn't feel cruel anymore. It felt like release. Lena stood in the doorway, her hand trembling around the wooden horse. The morning light hadn't yet reached the house, gray shadows hung across the room like a fading dream. Mr. Harlan was awake, staring at the ceiling, his breath uneven. The faint crackle of the dying fire was the only sound between them. She moved closer and placed the toy on the small table beside his bed. For a moment, he didn't notice. Then his eyes caught it, and something inside him broke. His hand reached forward, trembling, hesitant, as though he were afraid it might vanish if he touched it. "Where did you find that?" His voice was barely a whisper. "Upstairs," Lena said quietly. "Behind the sealed door." He closed his eyes. A single tear slid down the corner of his face. When he spoke again, his tone carried both disbelief and surrender. "I thought it was gone. I thought I buried it with him." Lena hesitated, unsure whether to continue. "I know about the fire," she said softly. "The newspaper clippings. They said it started in the nursery." He didn't flinch. He only nodded, a small, broken movement that seemed to drain what little strength he had left. "I did that," he said. "I caused it." The words came out flat at first, then cracked open, raw and heavy with guilt. "I'd been drinking. Just a little, I thought. He was asleep upstairs. I left the candle burning. My wife was out that night, visiting her sister. When the fire started, I was too slow, too drunk to think clearly. By the time I reached his room, he stopped, choking on the memory. The smoke had already taken him. I told the police it was faulty wiring. I told everyone that. But I've known the truth every day since." He held the toy to his chest like something sacred. "I hear him at night," he murmured. "Walking the halls, calling my name. I've heard him for years. He never left this house. Maybe he couldn't." The air in the room began to change. The warmth from the fireplace dimmed. Lena felt it before she saw it, a quiet shift, a lowering of temperature that made her breath visible in the air. The lamp on the table flickered once, then again, as though the light itself hesitated. Mr. Harlan didn't seem afraid. His eyes were fixed on a corner of the room, and a faint smile touched his lips. "Do you hear that?" he asked. Lena listened. At first there was nothing. Then, faintly, came the sound of laughter, soft, distant, unmistakably that of a child. It wasn't eerie or cruel, it was warm, playful, like a memory reborn. The sound filled the room, wrapping around them until the silence that followed felt full rather than empty. Mr. Harlan's breathing slowed. "He's here," he whispered. "He's finally home." Lena stood frozen, unable to speak. The light in the room dimmed to a soft glow, and for a moment, she could have sworn the air shimmered, as if someone unseen had passed through it. Mr. Harlan's gaze lifted slightly, his expression peaceful for the first time. Then he exhaled, long and steady, and didn't breathe again. The wooden horse slipped from his hand onto the blanket. The house fell silent. Lena waited, expecting the familiar creak of floorboards, the whisper through the walls, but none came. The stillness was different now, not heavy or watching, but calm. She felt it in her chest, a deep release, like the house itself had been holding its breath for decades and finally exhaled. She reached down and covered him with the blanket, smoothing the fabric gently. "Rest now," she said quietly. "Both of you." For a long time, she sat beside him, staring into the fading firelight. The air had changed, lighter, clean. The shadows no longer seemed alive, they were just shadows again. As dawn broke through the curtains, the house stood silent and at peace, the ghosts of its sorrow finally laid to rest. It had been 3 weeks since the night Mr. Harlan passed. Lena hadn't planned to return, but the agency called to let her know the property had been sold, and her remaining belongings were still inside. She almost said they could throw them away, yet something in her told her to go back, one last time. The drive out to Harlan Manor felt different now. The trees that once seemed to crowd the road no longer leaned in like shadows. The fog was gone, replaced by clear air and sunlight filtering through leaves. For the first time, the house didn't feel like a warning on the horizon. It looked quiet, ordinary, even gentle. Lena parked near the gate and stepped out. The old gravel crunched beneath her shoes, and a breeze moved softly through the grass. The front door, once heavy and reluctant to open, swung wide with ease. Inside, everything felt changed. The air no longer pressed against her chest. Sunlight poured through the tall windows, painting golden streaks across the floor. The musty smell of age had faded, replaced by something faintly floral, as though the house itself had been aired out after a long, dark sleep. She walked through the hallway slowly, her footsteps echoing faintly. The portraits were gone, their outlines still faintly visible on the walls, but she didn't miss them. The house felt lighter without those watching eyes. Her few things, a coat, a notebook, a small travel bag, were stacked neatly on a chair by the doorway. She gathered them, intending to leave quickly, but something stopped her. The sound was faint at first, so soft she almost thought she imagined it, the creak of the rocking chair upstairs. She froze. The new owners hadn't moved in yet. The house was empty. Still, the sound continued, slow, rhythmic, and calm. Not the eerie scraping she remembered from before, but something softer, almost soothing. Against her better judgment, Lena climbed the stairs. The boards no longer groaned beneath her weight. The second floor, once sealed and hidden, stood open. The nursery door waited at the end of the hall, no longer warped or nailed shut. She stepped inside. The room was bathed in sunlight. Dust floated gently through the air, glowing like tiny stars. The rocking chair moved back and forth in a slow, steady rhythm, as if stirred by the wind. On the seat rested the wooden horse. Its surface was dulled by dust, but the carving was still clear, the letters "TH" catching the light. Lena walked closer. The air felt warm here, calm. On the small table beside the chair, a thin layer of dust had been disturbed. 2 words stood out, traced by a finger into the gray surface: "Thank you." Her breath caught. It wasn't fear this time. It was something else, something that made her chest ache in the best way. She reached out and touched the edge of the table, her hand trembling slightly. A soft breeze passed through the open window, brushing her hair across her face like a gentle touch. The chair swayed once more, slower now, until it almost stilled. Tears welled in her eyes. "You're welcome," she whispered, voice breaking on the words. For a moment, she stood there, taking in the quiet. The nursery felt alive again, but not haunted, alive the way a place feels when it's finally at peace. The air was bright, and the silence carried a strange comfort, as though someone unseen was smiling nearby. Lena turned off the light as she stepped back into the hallway. The floorboards beneath her feet were steady. She walked down the stairs, through the open door, and out into the morning sun. The air outside was crisp and clean. The world seemed lighter. Before leaving, she glanced back once more. Through the upstairs window, the rocking chair moved ever so slightly, as if waving goodbye. Then the faintest sound drifted out, a child's laugh, soft and free, carried by the wind. Lena smiled. For the first time in a long while, there was no fear, no sadness, only peace. She walked to her car, the light warming her face, and drove away from Harlan Manor, leaving behind a house that had finally learned how to rest. Now tell me, after everything Lena saw, would you still take that job for $10,000? Or would you leave the money and your sanity behind? Comment your answer, I'll be reading them from the light, or maybe from the dark.